בזכות הצדיק רבי חיים פינטו, בזכות the holiday of Hanukkah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Be'ezrat Hashem will bless Rabbi Aharon and Rabbi Aharon's wife, Be'ezrat Hashem, and all their family, with big ברכה והצלחה, בסייעתא דשמיא גדולה, מקדמנו וחתקון איזה כתקון, Be'ezrat Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu this year will open up the gate of Parasha and the gate of Yeshua and the gate of Tefillah. May this year be a year of redemption and Min Kinyat Zon Be'ezrat Hashem. You know, Rabbi, tonight is a very special night. It's a night that Chazal even compared it to Rosh Hashanah. Why is that? In the Bnei Sascha, he even goes even one step further. He said if you take the word Matityahu, the numerical value of Matityahu is what? Rosh Hashanah. So why do Chazal compare tonight, Kafei B'Kislev, to Rosh Hashanah? So in the Chassidut, there is a teaching like this. The Chassidut teach us that essentially, from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, the judgment is written. Meaning that on Rosh Hashanah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides how much Parasha you will have, how much refuah you will have, how much happiness you will have, how much peace you will have, how much HaKadosh Baruch Hu will protect you, will bless you. It's all written on Rosh Hashanah. But that judgment that is decided and that is sealed on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur does not get put into action or does not get put into our day-to-day life until when?
Hanukkah.
Until Hanukkah. Until Kafei B'Kislev. That on Kafei B'Kislev, the year starts. So from Kafei B'Kislev till Kafei B'Kislev, it is 1 year. So essentially, whatever we prayed for, and whatever we did so much teshuvah for, and whatever we had so much kavanah for, and we cried, and we thought to change throughout the entire month of Elul that we passed just a few months ago, all of that could not be put into action until Be'ezrat Hashem tonight. So that's why Chazal say that on the first night of Chanukah, a person needs to look into the candles of Chanukah and have the kavanah that he could completely renew himself and to bring himself to a point like Adam HaRishon on the first Rosh Hashanah that ever existed, which was the day of the creation of Adam HaRishon. And that's why this day is so important. It's a day where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is really giving us all what we asked for and all what we prayed for on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And that is why it's very important for us to position ourselves to be a kli kibul, to be a vessel of receiving that shefa that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bless us in this entire year to come. So Beit HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bless all the tzaddikim and tzaddikot here that gathered here for Shiur Torah. And Beit Hashem this year we're going to start it b'kedusha, b'tahara, and we'll have big b'siyata d'shmaya. Amen. Beit Hashem. Now, but for the next 7 days, we're all going to be very busy with the mitzvah of lighting candles, specifically lighting candles of Chanukah. But it's very important that when we come to a mitzvah, we understand the mitzvah not only on how to do it, but why we do it and what we achieve by doing it. Because once we're able to understand the mitzvah, then we know what we're working for. We know what we're working towards. And that is why when we reach a holiday that we're going to spend 8 days only busy with one mitzvah, lighting candles, I think it's important we all truly understand the mitzvah of Chanukah. But the mitzvah of Chanukah comes from what? Comes from the core of what? Of the menorah. Which we know the menorah and Chanukah are actually two different things completely. What is the difference between them? Menorah was what resembled a Chanukah, but it was the resemblance of a Chanukah in Beit HaMikdash. Chanukah is something that we imitate in order to celebrate the miracle that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did with the menorah. So the core of Chanukah is actually what? The menorah. But the Zohar HaKadosh teaches us that the menorah, it was not something ordinary. It was something that was above nature. It was the core of light and it was the core of shefa of the entire world. To the point where the way the Beit HaMikdash was built, it was built in a way to accommodate that light of the menorah in order to share that light with the entire world. Where do we see that? Chazal say, at the time, when they were building ancient buildings, the windows were not like windows today that are very thin. The windows were really openings in the walls. And the windows were very, very thick. The Midrash says that usually at the time when they were building a window, how did they build it? They built it in a manner where the hole that is in the exterior of the building was a certain size. And then when you go inside the building, the hole gets wider as it goes. So it's like essentially a funnel, but the small end is outside and the big end is inside. Why is that? In order to allow the room to absorb as much light as possible. If the opening was very narrow and it was the same size as the outside hole of the window, then the light would be constrained. Because we want the light to be spread out throughout the entire room, at the time they would build the windows in a manner like this, where the outside light would enter into the small hole, and as a result of that, illuminate the entire room. The Midrash says that the windows of where the menorah was placed was exactly opposite. Where they put the small end in the inside and the wider exit in the outside. Why? Because the true source of light wasn't the sun. The true source of light when it regarded to the menorah was what? It was the light of the menorah. And that's what we say in the Zohar Kadosh. Shemen v'ketoach yisameach lev. That the menorah was the core of light and bacha in the world. Where there was not a mitzvah that Bnei Israel could do that would bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu happiness and joy like the ketoret and the menorah, like what we said. Shemen v'ketoret yisameach lev. The candles of the light of the menorah and the ketoret was what would make HaKadosh Baruch Hu's heart a splendor with happiness. Now, there is something with regards to the halacha and to the instructions of the menorah, which is extremely unique. As we know, Beit HaMikdash was placed in whose land?
Yehuda. Between.
Yehuda. Yerushalayim belonged to Yehuda. Beit HaMikdash supposedly should be in the land of Yehuda. It said that the Torah very carefully instructed that there would be a strip exiting the land of Binyamin and entering into the land of Yehuda, which would allow the menorah to be placed on whose land? Binyamin. Where the land of where the menorah was placed was on the land of Binyamin. Now Chazal even give an example on what this was like. Chazal say it's like La'avdil Avdei Adalot. It looked like you saw Yehuda's portion, and then there was a tail that entered into Yehuda's portion just to allow the menorah to sit on Binyamin's land. Where HaKadosh Baruch Hu stretched a little string of Binyamin's territory into Yehuda's territory just to allow the menorah to be there. The question that I've asked, why is that? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going out of his way to put such a beautiful mitzvah that shares light to all the world in Binyamin's land and even goes above and beyond to do so, there must be a reason behind it. And a bigger question, what did Binyamin do in order to receive such a big gift? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu go so far to put the menorah specifically in Binyamin's land? So in order to understand that, you have to understand really the core essence of the mitzvah of the menorah. In Abba Zohar Kadosh says that the menorah and the Chanukiah share one thing in common. They share what in common that the biggest portion of the mitzvah itself is the achana. And that's why the Mekubalim were very, very specific on even when they were preparing the achana of the mitzvah, was the preparation of the mitzvah was even, some say, bigger than the mitzvah itself. With the Mekubalim, when they would prepare the Chanukiah, they would have kavanot and intentions. They would mix the letters of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to build tzirufim. They had an entire process. Why? Because the organization of how we prepare the mitzvah of Chanukah and of the menorah was very, very important in order to perfect the mitzvah. That's why Arizal would wait the entire night until the menorah would finish in order to be able to prepare it for the next day. Right after the mitzvah is finished, turns off to prepare for the following day. Chazal give a very important instructions in regards to the preparation of the menorah, which is extremely strange. As we know, in order to create light, we need two things. We need the oil, and then you need a ptil. What is a ptil? A wick. HaKadosh Baruch Hu specifically directs the Kohanim that the wick that will be used for the menorah should not be any piece of cloth. So we ask, so what should it be made out of? So the Chazal said that HaKadosh Baruch Hu asked that the wick would be created from the clothing of the Kohanim. And now, but this is something extremely strange. Because we know that the clothing of the Kohanim was not just any regular clothing. There was so much rules of how to respect the clothing, how to make sure the clothing is placed properly, to the point where we're not even allowed to take out the clothing from out of Beit HaMikdash. It was asur to do so. To the point where if a Kohen would not wear this right and correct clothing at the time of the specific sacrifice, it would not be accepted. That the clothing was actually a big deal in Beit HaMikdash. Could you imagine a Kohen wears the wrong shirt and whatever sacrifice he's doing is not kasher? To that level. So how can HaKadosh Baruch Hu instruct the Kohanim to take such holy clothing and to burn it and to use it as a wick in order to light the menorah? And if HaKadosh Baruch Hu asked for such a specific request, what is the meaning behind it? So in order to understand this, Rabotai, we have to truly understand what is clothing. So now, Rabotai, the Torah gives us, throughout many teachings, the importance of the clothing we wear. For a few different reasons. First of all, the clothing that a person wears has an extremely strong impact and influence on a person. And to give an example, we could say it in a manner like this. You know, Rabbi Aharon, if tomorrow you go and you wear a suit and a hat and you dress like a Rav, automatically, if you like it or if you don't, you're going to feel like a pressure, like an influence to act accordingly. Where a person wearing the clothing of a Rav will have a hard time going to sin because that clothing that he is wearing has a very, very powerful, strong impact on him. To go in a simpler manner, in a simpler example, it's like you come to a person, you tell him wear all white, from head to toe. Automatically, his behavior will completely shift, will completely change. Why? Because he's going to say, if I'm going to run, I might trip. And if I trip, I'm going to get completely dirtied. So, if I'm wearing white, I have to be careful on how I walk, to not bang into things, to not kick things that are dark colors that will stain my clothing. So naturally, when you wear white, you find yourself having the influence of being very composed, very calm, very kind, not pushing things, not being arrogant. That's the reason why on holy days where we need to hold those attributes, what color do we wear? White, to have that influence. And on the exact opposite side, to prove the power of the clothing we wear, if a person is going to wear all black, how is he going to act? He's going to be very strong and very mean and tough and kick things and push things. Why? Because in his head, in his self-conscience, no matter how he acts, it doesn't change. So we see that the clothing has an extreme impact on a person. There's many different examples where the Torah even gives us specific halachot with specific guidance of what to wear, when to wear, how to do for that reason. But there is a second type of clothing. And that is not a physical clothing, but actually a spiritual clothing. But when we talk about clothing, it's not specifically closed off for physical, but the Torah even teaches us that there's something spiritual that is called clothing. Where do we see this? We see this with Adam HaRishon. We know when it says that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created Adam HaRishon, he was wearing bigdei,
Adam HaRishon?
bigdei, oh,
Yeah.
he was wearing the clothing of,
Esav.
no, so wait, he was wearing,
No, he was naked.
He was wearing b'gadei in the beginning. It was a light, it was a clothing, it was a complete spiritual clothing. Later on, when he sinned, it says HaKadosh Baruch Hu dressed him with kutonet leather. With an ayin, not with an aleph. Aleph is light, ayin is leather. Later on, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he changed their clothing. It says that Adam HaRishon, that kutonet that he had, that garment of light that he wore, it was a garment that whenever he wore it, it had the power to control all the animals. And that's how Adam HaRishon was essentially able to call all the animals, to name them. That's how Adam HaRishon was able to control the Malachim. Why? Because of that garment that he wore. That garment was passed on to who? To Noach. How did Noach control the animals to bring them into the Teva? What he called them? No, he wore that garment that had control on the animals. The moment he wore that, he was ruler on all the animals. Later on it said that Terach had it. And who took it from Terach? Esav. With the day when Abraham Avinu passed away, Terach killed Esav killed Terach and stole that garment. And that was the garment that was later on taken by Yaakov to trick Yitzchak. But that's why we say, Esav ish tzayid. Yitzchak was a man of the field. He was a conqueror. How was he a conqueror? How was he a man of hunting? So Chazal explained, not because he was good at it, but because he wore a garment that he had control on all living beings in front of him. Now clearly when we approach this concept of a clothing that controls animals, one thing is clear. We are not talking about a physical shirt. Because I don't think there's any specific clothing that you could wear and suddenly become how do you call it? The cartoons.
Superman.
To become a Superman. That doesn't exist. That garment clearly was made out of what? It was a complete spiritual garment. And that's where we learn where there is this concept of a physical garment and a spiritual garment. The Zohar Kadosh asks us, what is the most powerful garment, most powerful piece of clothing that a person could wear? What is the clothing that a person could wear? They could reach the highest forms of success and highest forms of kingdomship and the highest forms of height. So Zohar Kadosh answers something very, very strange, very, very unique. Zohar Kadosh says, Livushin de Biza. What does that mean, Livushin de Biza? In translation, Livushin de Biza means clothing of shame. Then when a person wears clothing of shame, that is the most powerful clothing to reach the great heights of success. Where do we know that? Where do we learn that from? So we know what Chazal teaches us. If you see someone that gets embarrassed, what should you do, Rabbi Dan? Run to him and get a bacha from him. That if you see someone that's being embarrassed and he's being shamed and he's being red and you see that he wants to bury himself, run and get a bacha from him. Why? Because that moment, whatever he will bless you, whatever he will say, it will come true. Why is that? Why, if you are embarrassed, you have suddenly now the ability to bless?
Because you purify after this.
Mazeh?
After you've been embarrassed, so you're clean with all your heads.
That's what Chazal explained later on, that by being embarrassed, you have suffering, and suffering bring you to a kaparat avonot. But it doesn't make sense of why specifically, when a person gets embarrassed, he has now power of blessing and power of kochot al-tiv'im, powers of spiritual powers. So in Abotai, the Zohar Kadosh says something like this. What is the essence of a person being embarrassed? A person that is embarrassed, it is a person that in one moment, that man has a complete tzimtzum of himself. Where a moment that a person is embarrassed, he feels small, he feels vulnerable, he feels hopeless, he feels put down, he feels that somebody is overpowering him. That in one moment, if a person likes or if he doesn't, what happens to a person's inner self? It completely shrinks. Now, if a person within himself completely shrinks, what happens to all the other space that he would normally occupy? Now it's empty. Now it's a big empty void. Zohar Kadosh says, what happens in that moment? The moment that person gets embarrassed and he shrinks, a void is created. Once that void is created, HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes and fills it. And once HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes and he's filling that void that man now hold within himself as a result of being embarrassed, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is standing with him. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mamash with him. He has a koach to bless.
How about the Chatan? For what reason is the Chatan?
Chatan is nikui of avonot. Chatan and Brit Milah is because at that moment HaKadosh Baruch Hu erases all his sins. That is Chatan for a different reason. Being embarrassed is completely something completely separate and different. What's incredible about this is that if anyone sits down to think about the moment that they were embarrassed, two things automatically happen. First of all, it's like a sensation happens in the entire body. where it's like a person dresses you with a completely new dress. It's something that is unexplainable. And even the person's color of his exterior changes automatically. Where a person gets embarrassed, either he becomes white or either he becomes red. Where it's really like a secondary garment was added on top of that person. That's why HaKadosh says, that is the essence of being embarrassed. When one condenses himself and makes himself small, in this case it's forcefully, now HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a lot of room to act. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a lot of space to come into that person and to be present within that person. And that is essentially the essence of humility. What is humility? Humility, Chazal say, is the key to success. Humility is the key of reaching to great, lofty levels of anything in life. Whether it's Torah, whether it's Parasha, whether if it's Gadlut, anything. Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom. He was able to bring down the Torah. He was able to go up to the Malachim. What was the core attribute that the Torah witnesses on him that actually gave him the ability to reach to such levels? It says, Moshe anav mikol adam. That Moshe was able to reach to great levels of Gdula because of one reason. Because he made himself small. He was extremely humble. And as a result of that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu pushed him forward. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can only be present and can only bless a person that he creates space for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be with him from the first place. When a person makes himself small, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the room to enter. And that's what we say every single time we do Shemona Yisrael. What do we say? Re'ani le'afar lechol tiyeh petach libi betoratecha. I am like dust in front of you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We read this in Eloi Netzor, in the end of the Shemona Yisrael. I am like dust in front of you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And as a result of that, Hashem opened my heart to receive the Torah. The essence of receiving blessing and any sort of presence of Hashem is one being humble, one condensing himself in order to place room for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the opposite of that is what?
Gava.
Gava. We know that the person that has pride, it says black and white. Gava rosho ve'achav levav oto lo ochal. David HaMelech writes in the Tehillim, a person that lifts his head and widens his heart and he makes himself bigger than what he is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot be with him. Why can't HaKadosh Baruch Hu be with him? Because if you are making yourself bigger than what you really are, then there's even a deficit, a minus of space that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can come in. Where HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot come into a place where a person does not leave room for him. A man of Gava, HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot stand. Not because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has something personal, I don't like you because you have Gava. Because you pushed HaKadosh Baruch Hu out of the equation. You leave him no room. And this, Rabota, is actually a lesson that we could apply in our entire life. If a person wants HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be present in his life, it's very simple. Leave him room. Give him space. The problem that we have today is that we think, and we have this assumption, that if you will be able to control and you'll have ability of, like today, people like putting cameras everywhere, to see everything, to know everything, that things will run perfectly. You know, there is a saying that I thought of, that always I tell the young, because the young, they stress for things that don't exist. When you take control, you lose control. And when you give control, you have control. What does that mean? Sometimes, Rabotai, we want to control. We want to be able to predict. We want to be able to with my knowledge, with my abilities, with my swiftiness, with my ambition, with my charisma, I will be able to control and I will be able to reach to a place of success. Bichlal not. A person wants HaKadosh Baruch Hu to act for him. Give him room. Close your eyes a little bit. Stop. Act a little bit less. The more you're going to try to take control, the more you're going to realize that you're only losing control. The moment a person realizes that only if you give HaKadosh Baruch Hu the moshchot, the reins, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take you to the exact place where you have to be. And the place where you have to be will be the place which will be the best for you. And that is what Abotai is something that I see in today's generation. That it is incredible. People, they have this assumption. They want to control. The more they try to control, the less bacha they have. And it's like you can even use it as an example of, even on a material example. It's like a man, an owner of a big company. If that person wants his company to run smoothly, what does he need to do? If he has 100 employees, 200 employees, what does he need to do?
Third-party management.
He needs to come
Delegate, to give
and to delegate. In other words, to give control. Once you're going to give control, then you'll have an ability to have control on everything. But if you want to control, everyone's going to end up running away. And you're going to end up having a big mess and everything's going to fall apart. And that's what we do in our lives. We say, I would like to and this is even in the smallest examples. We even give an example. I say, always the shiurim that are the best classes that we have are the classes that are the least prepared. What does that mean? Sometimes they'll come and they say, let's do a big shiur Torah in this place. We'll take a whole 3 months ahead, and they start to plan, and they plan. And suddenly you see you finish the shiur, and you feel empty in the end of all of it. That happens a lot of times people, when they do events. A lot of times they organize the event. They think that after they complete the event, they're going to be so fulfilled. But in the end, they end up feeling deceived. Where it's like, no matter how good it was, it didn't meet their expectation. Why is that? It's very simple. Because a person even having expectation is control. Because expectation is what? Is that you, smart men, are going to predict where it will be. And you expect that on your actions, you predict that it will be here. So when it happens, sometimes you feel it. It wasn't what I thought it was. All that work, I don't feel good afterwards. And on the other side, sometimes you'll sit down with an appointment, and then one man comes, then another boy comes, and that one comes, and now knocks on the door. And then suddenly you bring out a bottle of lechaim, and then you pour, and then you order more food, then you create, and suddenly you have an event where you feel the most fulfilled. Why? Because you had no expectation. The moment you have no expectation, suddenly you said there is blessing, there is bacha, whatever happens. Because you didn't expect, you didn't control, there is bacha within it. And that is a lesson that a person needs to carry every single day of his life. The more we will have bitachon HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the more we allow HaKadosh Baruch Hu to guide us into this, because at the end of the day, He's controlling. So, to try to take control from Him is not going to help. If we want to end up where we're supposed to be, the bacha that belongs to us, to come to a place of being fulfilled, we need to get used to giving control to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, closing our eyes, and if we do so, HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes control, and we have control and reach the place where we're supposed to reach. That is a big lesson. Condense yourself, leave room for Hashem. When there's room for Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can be present, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can bring miracles, and He can bring big shefa. This is even to the point where a lot of the Kubanim would say, don't count your money.
Don't
count your money. You're not allowed to count it. So the question is why?
To limit it.
He said, because the moment you count it, you limit it. The moment now you know how much money you have, you leave no room for Hashem to create a miracle. Because now you're holding it, you know how much to do it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to make $1 fall from the sky. But maybe if you don't count, somehow HaKadosh Baruch Hu can act. When your eyes are closed, He cannot act in front of you. So, if you don't count, you give control to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to that level. Abotai, we all need to take upon ourselves this attribute, this act of giving control to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To go back to our subject. The most powerful clothing that one could wear is what? The clothing of when one is embarrassed and one is by force brought to a place of complete humility. That clothing that person wears makes him reach great lofty levels of success and of wealth and of kingdomship and of respect, etc., etc. The question is asked, who was the one who wore the levushim de biza, the clothing of shame, like no other tzaddik ever before? Who was it?
That he wore
the clothing of busha, of shame, like no other man before.
Yosef?
Why?
Because he was really great and he was sold as a slave.
Tzaddik, Rabbi Aharon tzaddik. Rabbi Aharon is a big tzaddik. So we're reading now about this week's Parasha. Yaakov in alav shalom, he loved Yosef tzaddik. What did he give him? gave him a kutonet pasim, a garment.
It's not the same garment from Aharon Rishon.
Maybe.
Adam
That
Rishon
garment.
went to Nimrod, no?
Huh?
Yeah.
Nimrod
Ken,
was wearing Adam
Ken,
Rishon.
Ken. That garment that Yosef received from Yaakov was the garment that was the cause of him being thrown to a pit. The most shameful and lowest point that a person can be in. That garment caused him to be sold as a slave. That garment was caused him to be given to one of the servants of Ishet Potiphar. That garment caused him to be thrown to jail an additional time. That garment that Yosef HaTzadik wore was a garment of what? The garment of Biza. The garment of shame. Where throughout every single step of his life, he was shamed and he was put down. But as a result of being put down and being shamed and being so humble within himself, we know, even when Paro said, Yosef, you are so smart. The way you translate the dreams are so clever. Mi chacham kamocha. I never met a smart man like you. What was the answer of Yosef HaTzadik?
That Hashem gave him.
Me? Chas v'shalom. He couldn't even see himself in the equation. It was all HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That came a result of what? That came a result of him being embarrassed. And that shame that he had, and that humility that he had, and all that room that he gave HaKadosh Baruch Hu to exist within himself, brought him to the level of being what? Reaching to levels of kings. Where that's what we say, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu stood hand in hand with Yosef every single step of the way, and that's why he was the one that was able to become king, that none of the tribes were able to reach. And also Yosef HaTzadik was the only one that was able to bring tribes near Katchila. That he was the same level of Yaakov HaTzadik, of Yaakov Avinu alav shalom. It says that when Yosef was about to pass away, he called his young brother. Who's his young brother? Binyamin. And he gave Binyamin two things. What did he give him? He gave him a bag of gold. And he gave him what else? He gave him 5 garments. Maybe we could say that one of the garments that Yosef HaTzadik handed over to Binyamin was what? It was that exact same spiritual garment of Livush Libiza. It was that same garment of shame that he had to acquire after all those years of being embarrassed. Rabbi Pinto, the student of Arizal, which all his books talks about Gilgulim, about reincarnations, he says something beautiful about the entire line of Binyamin. So if you look at Binyamin's tribe, from him downwards, generation by generation, they were all faced with one challenge. What was the challenge? It was the challenge of being put in a place where they needed to essentially embarrass themselves, to belittle themselves in order to reach to great levels of success.
Rabbi, but that's the only tribe that all the other tribes, they destroyed them completely besides of 50,000. Binyamin.
I didn't understand that.
The other 10 tribes, they went to war against them.
Against Binyamin?
Binyamin and destroyed all of them.
Then that even proves our point even more. Binyamin's tikkun, like what Rabbi Pinto teaches us, it was the essence of needing to shrink, to be embarrassed, to be put in a place of one makes himself small in order to allow space for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Where do we see that? Like what Rabbi Asher said now. The tribe of Binyamin, they were shrunken. They were tzimtzum.
Minimized.
They were minimized to, like what Rabbi Asher said,
50 families.
50 families, something very small. But in a more specific example, who do we know the tribe of Binyamin that was put in the exact same position of Binyamin, the exact same position of Yosef? Shaul, and someone even more famous that everybody will be able to. Everyone. Who? Mordechai.
Oh.
Mordechai was put in a place where either he could have stand and hold his respect, or do something completely courageous, which was what? To put a sack, to put a cloth, a sackcloth, to sit on the ground of the streets and to fast and to cry. In other words, what did Mordechai do? Minimize himself to the smallest degree. As a result of that, ומרדכי יצא מלפני המלך בלבוש Malchut.
Malchut.
V'ateret za'av. After Mordechai put that sack and he put himself in the lowest point, it says Mordechai left from the king and he was wearing the clothing of the kingship. What clothing of kingship? Not the clothing of that physical king. But he was wearing at that point the clothing of Malchut. The clothing of a real king. What is the clothing of the real king? Malchuto dekucha berichu. The kingship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Where the moment where Mordechai stayed in that exact same line that Binyamin and Yosef was, which minimizing himself to allow HaKadosh Baruch Hu to fill in that space, HaKadosh Baruch Hu put his garment of Biza on Mordechai. And that's how Mordechai was able to completely flip the fate and to bring a complete redemption. As a result of what? As a result of one person minimizing himself completely in order to receive big light. And this Rabotai could even be used and could even be explained on the essence of a candle. In Rabotai, in Kabbalah, and more particularly in the Moroccan Masoret, there is this concept of lighting candles for tzaddikim. Where in the Ilulot we light candles. Whenever we want to pray in the mirror of a tzaddik, we light a candle. Or even more so, as I say, Kiner Hashem, Nishmat Adam. The candle of Hashem is the neshama of a man. Why is it that we light a candle at the time of praying for a tzaddik? What is the connection between a candle and the neshama of a tzaddik? How do they correlate? How do they come together at any level? No, what is the connection? So, the Zohar HaKadosh explains it in a manner like this. Zohar HaKadosh says, neshama, what is it? It's a big source of light. Whenever a person wants to bring down the neshama of a person, that's what we do essentially when we're lighting a candle. We're essentially bringing down that piece at least of that neshama to bring down that neshama. If we want to bring down a piece of light, a piece of the neshama of a tzaddik, what does he need? He needs a body. He needs space. But what is the problem? The problem that in our world, even what perceives to be empty like the air, is really not empty. It's completely occupied with what? With air that is what?
Oxygen.
But in other words, it is a material,
Yeah.
material existence, material creation. So even the air is occupied and there's no room for the neshama to descend. So if a person wants to bring down light and to bring down a piece of a neshama, you need to create space. How do you create space for a neshama to come down? So Zohar HaKadosh says you need to create a minus of material. What is a minus of material? The minus of material is a candle. Now, but what is the core essence and fundamental act of a candle? What is a flame constantly doing? It's constantly shrinking. Where it takes oxygen and burns it, it's constantly shrinking within itself. Why? Because a flame, whatever you put into it, what happens to it? It makes material completely disappear. That minus of space, that minus of material, is the exact ingredients that is needed in order to bring down a big light. Where the only place where a neshama could rest in this world is within a flame. Why within a flame? Because a flame is constantly minimizing itself. It's taking material and it's making it as small as possible. It becomes even tiny, tiny molecules in the air. And because of that tzimtzum, because of that constraint that the candle is doing, what comes to a reality of that? What comes as a result?
Space.
Big light. By one shrinking itself, big light is created. And that is why, by lighting a candle, we can bring down a piece of a neshama. And that's why the Zohar HaKadosh says that you're not even allowed to blow a candle. Why? Because Zohar HaKadosh says when you blow a candle, it's like you blow out a neshama. Because the neshama sits within a candle. It is a body for a candle. If you want to bring down neshama, you need that candle in order to be able to give him some space for that spiritual being to stand in this world. The secret for bringing down light to the world is what? It is tzimtzum. It is constant shrinking. And that's how we could understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu specifically asked that the wick of the menorah would be made out of what? Made out of the clothing of the Kohen. To teach us one thing. To teach us for a person to create the light of the menorah that will illuminate the whole world, what is necessary? Levushim de biza. The garment that is created by what? By the shrinking, by the tzimtzum, the minimizing of oneself.
Rabbi, it's also minimize the air,
Nachon?
because the oxygen, when he's using it, if you close everything, we'll not have any oxygen.
It eats material.
It's
It's everything. In the book of creation, Sefer Yetzirah, it says there is not one thing, there is no material in the world that cannot be eaten by fire, just a matter of how much. Any material in the world, you put it in fire, if you have enough fire, it eats it. Where fire has the power to swallow worlds. That is the essence of fire. Whenever there is a constriction, a constriction of something, great light could be. And that is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose that it would be used out of the garment of the Kohen to teach us. Wear the clothing of Biza, wear the garment of constriction, and great light will be created. That also explains why HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose that the menorah would be on whose land? It would be on Binyamin. The land of who? The land of the one who received the garment of Biza. Botai, if we want to start this year and to have a year full of shefa, a year full of light, a year where HaKadosh Baruch Hu will stand with us, will be within us, we need to give him room. How do we give him room? We need to act like the candles that we're going to light every single night. Constrict yourself. Make a person small in front. Put Shaberechu in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu will have room to come and to act within oneself. Beit Hashem, the Tzaddik Rabbi Pinto. Beit Hashem, this holy holiday of Chanukah. The Tzaddik Rabbi Avraham Bulafia. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, today is Hilula. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Beit Hashem, bless each and every one of the Tzaddikim and Tzaddikot here with big bracha v'atzlacha. B'siyata d'shmaya gedola. Makadal mo yivech kol yizakeh kol. And Beit Hashem this year be a year of redemption on a personal level and on the level of all Klal Am Yisrael. Amen.
So the question, the last part of the question is basically, I think there are some opinions that say that it was wrong for the Hashmonaim to become kings.
It was.
So had someone starts, a lot of times you start with a person very humble, very mitzamtzem, right? That's how they won the war, because they were mitzamtzem. And they were very good people. And then they won the war, they became kings, and all of a sudden they, so I guess the question is, what's the, how, even if they could fall to that, how does a person over the course of their life, when they succeed, not become gava?
That is
and
a true
not,
test of a person.
Yeah.
Now, we say that everything that a person lives with, anything that he has, it's kili, it's a vessel. What does that mean? It means that all what we are enduring, or it's, lately my English, I don't know what happened.
Because Kashmir's.
Everything that a person choveh,
Go through experiences
with his life, good or bad, positive or negative, they are all vessels and tools in order for him to complete his tikkun. Now, what is the example that I always give for this? So, if you want to send someone to fix the roof, what do you have to send with him? You can't send him with a plunger. It's a tool, but it's the wrong tool. You have to send him with the correct tools to fix the roof. So you're going to send him with the roof tools. Now, on the other side, if you want someone to cut a diamond, can you send him with the tools of the roof? No. You have to send him with very delicate tools that are very small and very precise. So both people, one's fixing a diamond, one's fixing the roof, they both need tools. Both tools are completely different. One is delicate and soft and very royal, and one is very hard and hot and smelly and dirty. A person, throughout his life, he's going to experience good things, he's going to experience bad things, he's going to experience big successes, he's going to experience big failures. Those successes and failures are the tools that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put in his hands in order to repair what he was sent to repair. So if a person gets a hit, in it, Hashem gave you a tool. Take that tool and figure out how you could repair what you're supposed to repair. A person, Hashem gave you a gift. That is your tool. That's why some people, their tikkun is to be poor. And from that poverty, to be able to still hold to their emunah, and to still have faith in Hashem, and to still be kind one to another, and throughout all the pressure and all the stress, to still have a clear direction. Other people, they are faced with a test to be very, very wealthy, and still keep their head and their feet to the ground. That's a tool too. But we can see that even with Yosef HaTzadik in this Parasha. Yosef HaTzadik, he was beautiful. It's a big gift. But that gift came actually with a big challenge. What was the challenge? All the Goyot wanted him. So what seemed to be a gift, now when you go take a step further, you realize that it's a tool of a challenge that he needed to repair, needed to overcome. So even a person that reaches to great levels of height, of whatever it is, of wealth, of fame, of power, the only thing that's going to keep him on his feet and also continue that growth is if he always, between him and himself, he knows that all that greatness and everything that's happening, good or bad, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's doings. And that's actually the answer for a suffering and for a gift. Meaning, I will tell the same thing to a person that asks, if a person is poor, how does a person live the life of Kedusha and Emunah and Simcha and Ahava, being throughout so much suffering? The answer is the exact same. As long as you're able to realize that all what you are, that you're experiencing in your life is tools of Hashem, then you'll always have the path and you'll always have the direction of where to go, and you'll always have the direction of where you are and why you are where you are. So that is the biggest tool that one can give, which is the essence of the entire class.
Yeah, we learn from this.